Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to a 5-part series on supply chain data management. This series is sponsored by Assent Compliance. Assent Compliance provides cloud-based SaaS solutions that help companies manage their supply chain data, facilitate stakeholder and supply chain education on regulatory and program requirements, and increase transparency between businesses. Assent helps companies overcome the challenge of meeting their compliance business requirements. Finally, Assent streamlines the data exchange process for suppliers, making it easier for them to comply with their customers' data requests. For more information, check out their website, assentcompliance.com. In this podcast series, I visit with several members of the Assent Compliance team to visit about supply chain data management. We consider the synergies between different types of compliance disciplines, the impacts on organizations of compliance failures in this area, and what are some of the drivers for continued legislation and regulation in this area. It is a fascinating series. I know you will enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening. In this episode 1, I visit with Matthew Whitaker. He is the Vice President of Marketing at Assent. He's also one of the co-founders of the organization. We discuss how Assent Compliance came to be founded through seeing the market need the founders observed and how they moved to fill that by creating Assent Compliance. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for another episode. And today I have with me Matthew Whitaker. Matthew is the Vice President of Marketing Assent Compliance, but he's also one of the co-founders. So, Matt, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So, Matt, I was wondering if you could give our audience a little bit about your professional background, because I've noted that although you're significantly younger than me, you've done a lot of stuff. So why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
For sure. I actually have a pretty unique story in that my first ever job out of university was following the cliche, do what you love. So I opened a boxing gym because I really liked boxing and thought that would be a good business. And it turned out that it was a very painful experience. And I kind of tell people that was the painful way to do an MBA, because I learned a lot about marketing. I learned how to build websites. I learned how to do Google AdWords. That was me learning everything about business in the most painful way possible, because it was a boxing gym and I was getting beat up a lot. And from there, I started an app. It's called nonotes.com. It still exists. It's one of the world's largest call recording and transcription platforms. And one day, and this is, if I'm front running it because we're talking about Assent today, one day I'm in a cab with my best friend and the guy that I lived with, who worked for what's called an NRTL, a nationally registered test laboratory. And he was describing his pain and the pain that the NRTL was going through, in that they were doing supply chain data consulting. So they would go to a company, a major electrical manufacturer, for example, go out to their suppliers, collect a bunch of data, and make them a report. And a couple of weeks later, they would go and get another contract, and they would go out to many of those same companies. They would collect a lot of the same data, sometimes from the same people, and they would make a very similar compliance report for that customer. And as we were drinking and discussing this business problem in the cab, we had the idea to start a company around supply chain data management. And that was almost a decade ago.
Can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of Assent and really how it's grown to the size it is now?
Well, out of that first cab ride, we recruited a friend who was a software developer and had a small software dev company, and we built up the minimum viable product, so to speak. And the first version of the application was specifically around materials compliance, collecting REACH data. And REACH, for those of you who don't know, stands for Restriction, Evaluation, Authorization of Chemical Substances, and it's an EU regulation. And as we took that product to market, we got a fairly major aerospace company to buy it, and that was essentially the seed money. And from there, we worked with them very closely for about 2 years, working on their REACH data management and their supply chain data management programs, and emerged out of that with a fully commercialized product compliance management suite. And from there, started acquiring customers at a fairly at a fairly rapid rate. And fast forward about a year and a half from there, we win a major RFP with one of the world's biggest industrial manufacturers of glass. And that was what I like to call the ESPN turning point in the company's history, or at least the first one anyways, because that really, we beat out all major competitors. Our company was, in the marketplace kind of deemed as the best materials compliance management system. And that really solidified our place as the leader. And from there, we started acquiring clients even quicker. And then I guess fast forward to there's Dodd-Frank 1502 gets passed, which is a regulation around ethical sourcing and conflict minerals. And we're the only, at the time, we're one of 2 or 3 companies on the market that have a solution to collect and manage data on ethical sourcing. So again, another big ESPN turning point for the company. And that was kind of the foundation of which Assent was built on.
So, Matt, one of the things that really has intrigued me about your company and your approach is the following. I'm a lawyer by professional training. Many in compliance are lawyers by professional training. Yet you and your founders team are not lawyers, don't have that professional background. So you're coming at this from a completely different angle. And it's really around the efficiencies, I would say, starting with some of the problems that led you to founding the company. But it's also not only just about efficiencies, it's about cutting through silos and giving the supply chain practitioner and the compliance practitioner, frankly, a wealth of information that they can use their professional training on to help make their companies run better. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment for sure. And I guess your observation that we're not from the legal background is a very fair one. I would say the next big inflection point in the company's history was when we brought on our CEO, and his name's Andrew Waitman, came from a venture capital background, then ran a database services company, grew it to one of the top ones in the world, and then joined us. And we're all, I think, aspirational technologists and entrepreneurs. And we looked at the space and saw that there was a category ripe for being defined. And when you look at the enterprise, you have Salesforce that started the cloud revolution, and they started in CRM, and it was in sales because sales will be early adopters because they want to sell as much as they can, so they'll gain efficiencies the quickest. And then you have marketing adopt software as a service with Marketo and Pardot and HubSpot. And then you look at the finance department, they go to NetSuite. And you look at every department is essentially in the enterprise getting SaaSified. And the compliance department and the supply chain department was a bit of a laggard in that space. So we had just a clear path to look at the business challenges, look at the workflow challenges, look at what was being done manually and automate it, and really examine the space from a business perspective, not necessarily a legal one, and see where we could bring the most value to companies.
So from that starting point, you've really expanded out and grown the Assent compliance team. I knew Jared Connors, and obviously he has a CSR background and is very passionate about that. But those are just really 2 of the components of Assent. And I was wondering if you could maybe detail for us some of the major, not really departments, but areas that Assent helps companies focus on.
Our vision for the future is one that we own the category of supply chain data management. And when you look at the different Gartner quadrants or Forrester waves, there isn't a category specifically carved out for supply chain data management. And we feel there should be, because it's a massive, massive category. And every single company, from a small law firm to a major electronics manufacturer, has a supply chain. Anything you buy when you're a company is your supply chain. And in the future, our aspiration, and we're getting there very quickly, is that companies will use Assent to manage any type of data that they need to from their supply chain, and then also have the capability to respond to any inbound data requests from the companies they do business with. So aspirationally, we are going to be the category leader for supply chain data management, and that's both upstream and downstream. So collecting data from your suppliers and then also responding and managing all the data that you need to give to the companies that you do business with. So that's the trajectory that we're on, and we're really excited about it.
As you might guess, because of my professional background as a lawyer, I am more comfortable with doing a sort of a professional lawyer's analysis than I am with data management, or data collection, which is really the bailiwick of yourself and Assent. And Matt, where I see this going is compliance officers, supply chain professionals, and frankly, risk officers would take the data that Assent is able to put in a usable format and then be able to make more efficient business decisions. That's perhaps decisions that make the businesses run more efficiently. Is that also something that's on the horizon for Assent?
Well, absolutely. So foundationally, that's the value that we bring to customers and the enterprises that we work with. The collection and the management is where they derive their value. So right from the first data type that we started collecting, REACH and ROHS data, the system would enable these risk officers or procurement officers or whoever was in charge for the materials compliance program to collect and manage the data in that as soon as it comes into the organization, they can run risk profiles on what they've collected. They can identify whether there's conflicting answers in the survey data that they've mandated from their suppliers. So in any type of data that we're collecting and managing, the overlaying value comes from the actions that you can take from it. And in many cases, and you identify this exactly correctly, it's the legal and risk profiles that you derive from the data that you've collected. So I think we're speaking the same language. We're both the technology that underpins the data management, but that empowers people to take their legal actions or run their risk profiles or decide whether they frankly want to do business with that supplier or not.
Well, Matt, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but this has been a fascinating way to open this podcast series on who is Assent, and I wanted to thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me, and I hope your listeners want to hear more about Assent because we're really excited about what we're doing over here.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Supply Chain Data Management, sponsored by Assent Compliance. I hope you'll join us again for another episode. You can find out more about Assent by checking out their website, assentcompliance.com. This special 5-part podcast series on supply chain data management is a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.